Go.
Hi everyone, this is Gail from Ladyfingers Sewing Center in beautiful Ole, Pennsylvania. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I have this gorgeous 790 machine by Bernina, and you should too if you don't already own one. It's a fabulous machine. It does so many wonderful things, and what I'm about to demonstrate for you today is really hits all my buttons. It's using decorative stitches, and it's using a special category of stitches that only the top of the line Berninas can perform. So I'm going to show you where these stitches are and then an exciting new way to stitch them out. So this is not machine embroidery, this is actual sewing with decorative stitches on the Bernina 790 Plus. These stitches are also on the 880 and on the old 730 top of the line machine, and maybe the 830, I'm not sure about that. But anyway, let me show you what's going on here. The 790 Plus has a nice big screen, so it's easy to get around and find all your pretty decorative stitches. To find the decorative stitch files, you go right here where this little curvy icon is, which is supposed to look like a decorative stitch, and you simply touch that. And you can see that these are actual files of decorative stitches. This shows up on nearly all the Bernina models of machines. This is where you find your decorative stitches. But on the top of the line machines, you'll see that some of these files have little crissy-crosses. See that little crisscross in the bottom right-hand corner of some of the files? That's a very special thing. That's because in those files, you're going to find machine stitches that are actually wider than 9 millimeters. Well, how is that possible? If the opening for your needle is only 9 millimeters, how can you do giant stitches that are much larger than that? The fact of the matter is this Bernina can move the feed dogs at an angle and create larger and very beautiful stitches, and that's a Bernina exclusive on the 790, the 880, and a couple of its predecessors. So I chose one of the files that has the very large multi-motion stitches, and I'm just going to select one. And you can see, look how large that stitch is. You can see there's a footprint of a foot. Okay, that's a 9 millimeter foot, but you can see that the stitch forms to be much larger than 9 millimeters. And in fact, on the Bernina, it'll show you how wide the stitch is and how long the stitch is. Most of the stitches you can alter to be a different shape and size by playing around with the width and length knobs. And if you've played around with it, the machine will let you know, because the size of the stitches will change to yellow. That means you've done something with it. So I can bring that back home to the original size, and you can see it's white again, and the same with the width. We bring it back to the normal setting. So that's just one of them. So I had this bright idea. I thought, wouldn't it be fun to go ahead and check out some nifty decorative stitches? And one of the other things I wanted to do is play around with the idea of using a double needle with decorative stitches. Now, you've used maybe double needles for things like pin tucking, or maybe to do a hem where you want two lines of stitches to be side by side, and normally we do that with a straight stitch. But listen guys, you can also use it for decorative stitches. Doesn't that sound like fun? I think it does. So let me go back to the files, and I'm going to open this up a little bit. That little arrow here lets you open up this window so that you can see more of it. And I'm going to go to the 1601 file folder and open that up. And you can see these are really pretty large decorative stitches. Some of them you've seen me use in the shop for our table runner kits that we do and other projects, because I really like to use them so much. So now I'm going to take it up a notch and actually select a stitch and use a double needle with it to get some really cool effects. So I tried some different things. Well, first, let's talk about double needles a moment. Double needles, if you've never used them before, are a lot of fun. What a double needle means is there are two needles installed on the needle bar, and the needles come in different widths. Now here you can see these needles are relatively close together. Okay, they're 2.5 millimeters apart. You can see that this one is slightly wider. You can see that the gap between the needles is a little bit wider. And here's one That's a 4mm size, which I'm going to use today. Okay, then we get 6mm, and the largest I believe that you can purchase is an 8mm. So listen, if you don't have a 9mm machine, you won't be able to use this because it's 8mm. It won't fit into the width of your opening in your needle plate. So we're gonna play around with some different things, which I'll show you how I played around with it anyway. I chose on the machine stitch 1603, which is this stitch. Okay, and I put a double needle in it, and I tried the 2.5. It looks like it's the 2.5mm width, and stitched out some samples just for fun. I just used a recycled scrap of quilt, a trimming off of a finished quilt, and I used this to try out stitches on quilt that I'm going to use for quilting because it's available and I don't care about it, so I can play with it. So I marked that I used a 2.5mm wide double needle and what stitch number it was, so it was easy for me to remember. This is stitch 1611, which is the one I ended up using for my project. Here I tried the 2.5mm double needle. Then I tried it on the 4mm wide double needle. And then I went ahead and tried it on the 6mm and the 8mm. If you notice carefully, you can see that because the machine knows, because I'm going to show you how to tell it, that what width needle you're using and what foot you're using and what stitch you're using, it will automatically reconfigure the shape of the stitch to accommodate the double needle so that you won't break it given the foot you're using and the needle you're using. And I think that's a pretty amazing thing. So I ended up using the 4mm needle because I liked the shape it created when the stitch pattern curled back around itself, and I thought it was a nice pretty effect, and I'll show you what the project ended up looking like. So I just made a very simple placemat because I love this wonderful pumpkin fabric, and then I had these are coca fabrics from Japan, and then just so you can see what happens on the back of the project, because you have one bobbin thread, okay, there's only one place for one bobbin thread. The bobbin thread's going to carry back and forth from needle to needle. So you'll see the stitch pattern looks thicker than what you see on the front, and I think that's really cool. So this is especially nice if you're doing projects that need to be sturdier, like tableware, table runners, things like that. Or if you just want that heavier, real bold effect that this creates. Okay, so we're going to go back to the stitch that I chose, which was 1611. All right, which is right here. And you can see that this stitch is so big, it's hard to see on the screen. Isn't that amazing? So the stitch pattern when stitched out singly looks a lot different than when it's stitched out with a double needle. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show you the double needle that I used, which is 4mm, and I'm going to actually install it into the machine. Make sure the flat part is at the back, and make sure the shaft is all the way up. And because my fingers are sore because I've been picking peppers, I do use this gadget. It's called what is this called? I forget. Anyway, we have them at the shop, and I'll put the link in the comments in the YouTube on our YouTube station. Just don't over tighten when you use one of these. You don't want to strip everything in the needle bar area. You don't want to strip the screw that holds your needle in place. And then when you're using the multi-motion stitches, you want to use a 40 foot. I'm using a 40C because this is a 9mm foot, and I don't believe it comes in a D. Okay, here's some key things you really need to take notes, remember for sure, so that you don't break anything. On your screen on the left, you'll see a foot, and right now it says 95C because I just got done finished doing some binding and I was using the bias binder foot attachment, and so I'm going to change my foot to be foot number 40. So I just type that in, and there's 40C. I touch it, and now the machine says, okie doke, so you've got the 40C foot on there. The other thing you want to double check is that you're using the 9mm throat plate, which I am. I've indicated that it already knows that, so we're good. Now here's something that you may not have been aware of. Not too many people talk about it, but I think it's one of the greatest things about the modern machines. You can tell the machine what needle you have on it. How many times have you sat down at your machine and you have no clue what needle is on your machine? You can't see the little inscription in the needle bar without a jeweler's loop, and it can be frustrating. So if you get in the habit of telling the machine what needle you have on it, life is good. So I'm going to select a double needle. Now it thinks there's a single needle on there. But we're going to tell it, not only do you tell it it has a double needle, but what size your double needle is. So we have a 4mm double needle. And have you ever noticed this little guy right here, this little icon with the bow on the needle? Touch it. Look at that. It's going to tell you to tell it what kind of needle and what size of needle you have. So this one is a sharp, and it is a size 80 right there. So I'm telling it it's a sharp, I'm telling it it's an 80, and I'm telling it it's a double needle. How's that sound? So now when you turn your machine off and on again tomorrow, you'll know exactly what needle you still have on your machine. Okay, get in the habit of using that. It's a great tool. So because I've stitched out samples, I can see just how the stitch is going to look before I sew it. Since I've done that already, I'm going to go right to the project. But first, we have to thread the machine, okay? So there's a little bit of trickiness here. It's no big deal, and there are other tutorials out there that show you how to thread your machine with a double needle, but I'll do it for you too. And so I'm using Aurifil 50 weight thread. I could use a different weight of thread, but this is what I decided to use. And I'm using my multi-thread holder up here. So I have 2 spools loaded up top, and there's a thread guide right here at the base of the multi-spool holder, and you're going to use that. You want to make sure that you thread one thread at a time because of the tension discs. We have to pay attention there as to what thread goes where. And then we also want to keep track of what thread is in the left needle and which thread is in the right needle. So I'm going to start with my left needle, pass it through the guide, and make sure your presser foot is up when you're threading your machine. That's a big thing, no matter what you're doing, whenever you're sewing. You always want to have your presser foot up to release the tension discs so that your thread goes in the right spot. So I'm going to bring my thread up, and notice I'm holding it with both hands so I can kind of feel it snap into place. And I'm going to want my left thread to go on the left side of the tension disc, okay? Bring it down and then continue to thread the machine like you normally do. Now the one difference is with a double needle, your needle threader is not made to thread double needles. That would be kind of difficult to put that in place. So I am going to attempt to hand thread my needle, and so because you're watching, it'll take me twice as long, but that's okay. And now when you thread your needle, it's bring your presser foot down, and that'll keep your tension in place now, because you don't need the tension anymore to be open while you're threading, but it helps a little bit. And I know you guys are going to comment on how I'm threading my needle. And there are needle threaders out there. I'm just too lazy to go find mine because I normally use my needle threader. Okay, so now I have my left needle threaded. Yahoo, there it is. So now I'm ready to do the right needle, and I bring it down. It's okay. You can bring it through the same thread guide. Bring it up through the tension. Don't forget, I need to have my presser foot up. Okay. And now I'm going to go on the right side of the tension disc that's at the top of the machine. Down around. Goes into the take-up lever just like the other thread. Into the thread guides down near the needle. Bring my presser foot down. And let's hope this goes a little faster. I'm going to thread my needle. There we go. Yeah, it was a lot faster. See, I got some practice in. Okay, so I have my right needle and my left needle threaded. Alright, so I want to test out my stitch because I was doing some other sewing, and I've selected my stitch. It knows I have a double needle in there. I think we're all set to go. So now I'm going to try it, and always start on a practice piece just to make sure that you know that your machine is threaded properly, that everything's copacetic, okay? So what I do is, because this presser foot, the 40C, does not have a slit in it so that I can just slide the threads underneath, what I often do is just take a stitch or two, and then if I go like this, I can pull those bottom threads right through the hole, no problem. So now I'm ready to sew. Isn't that slick? Well, the other thing you could do is just slide the threads underneath, but I thought it'd be fancy today. So here's something to notice when you're playing around with different decorative stitches on your sewing machine. Notice that the stitch pattern starts all the way to the left of its pattern, and so the rest of the stitch is kind of like over here, but this is the left side of it. And another reason to stitch out your design ahead of time is so that you really realize how large the pattern is. If I select this stitch, you can see, okay, it knows I have a double needle in there, and you can see that the stitch is sort of kind of in the middle. It starts in the middle. Here's another one that starts in the middle. Here's another one that pretty much starts more towards the right, but not in the middle. This one starts in the middle. So realize what you're doing with all that too. So I'm going back to the stitch that I want to do, which is 611. And I'm going to go ahead and see what happens. Now, when you're doing double needle work, pay attention. This is not something you just let go. You want to sew slowly and steadily, and you want to make sure both threads are doing what they're supposed to do. If a thread breaks or something happens, you want to try to catch it as soon as you can. And here's when I test something like this, I usually only need 1 or 2 repeats. So for now, because I'm pretty confident this is going to work, I'm just going to do 1 repeat, meaning 1 repeat of the design to test. So if I touch this icon right here, this is a pattern end, and the machine will automatically stop stitching, tie a knot, and cut the thread when the pattern repeat is finished. And that's a nice handy little thing to have. So here it comes around the bend, and you can see this is where the pattern is going to end. I just have a few more stitches to go. Alright. And there we go. See, it automatically stopped, it tied a little knot, and it cut the thread for us. Isn't that great? And that whole time I still had my foot on the pedal. Now I stopped, or it would start again. Alright, so I think that looks pretty good. I'm checking the back, and I see that everything looks just fine. So I'm going to be ready now to start on my actual project. So I have this really cute pumpkin fabric, and I have fused fusible fleece. It's double-sided fusible fleece, which is what I used for these placemats. You could use batting, you could use whatever you want. Just make sure everything is flat as possible, and securely basted. Whether you baste it with 505, this is fusible, so I didn't have to worry about that. You can pin baste, you can do whatever you normally want to do. So I want to start my stitching. I wanted to do diagonal rows down diagonally of this stitch, sort of kind of in between the pumpkins. They overlap over the pumpkins a little bit, but I sort of kind of liked like a windy feel to the whole thing, and I really liked the way that turned out on the back, so I went diagonally. And so when you do that, I wanted to start at the very edge of what I was stitching, right up here at the edge of my project. And so given the stitch pattern, it might go off the placemat a little bit, and I didn't want to lose the pattern. Now we're working with really large patterns, so we have to think ahead a little bit. So I have a giant whoopee here. This is a scrap piece of a couple layers of fabric that I have folded together, and I'm just going to use it to catch, just in case the machine decides to go off the edge with its stitch pattern. And it probably will a little bit, because I wanted to start my stitching right at the edge of my project. Now here's something that I just am in the habit of doing. When I'm starting a large pattern, I kind of want the rows to be pretty consistent. And to get that effect, I always start my stitch design at pattern begin. That's this icon right here. If you touch it, the machine will go back to the very beginning of the stitch pattern every time. And I find that that just looks really pro and professional, and I like the way that works. So I'm going to go ahead and start my first row of stitching. Now, when you're stitching using these gigantic stitches, you want to have an absolutely smooth surface to stitch on. You do not want a project to overhang and cause a drag on the feed dogs. In other words, you want to keep everything balanced and happy. So if you're going to try to attempt this on a large project, you just need to go very slowly, stop and start a lot so that you don't have any drag, meaning anything pulling, no tension whatsoever on the project. So there will be, I don't think we needed that too much, but that's okay. And you can see now that I'm doing a diagonal row. So my job is to keep this line consistent. If you really need to draw a guideline on your project, you can certainly do that. If it's off a little bit, riding by on a speeding horse, I don't think anyone will notice. But I just like kind of eyeball it, keep it kind of floating, get very light so that nothing's catching on anything. I happen to have my machine installed in a cabinet, so everything's level. If you do not have that, I strongly suggest you purchase a Sew Steady table. We have those in stock for all models of Bernina, and we can get them in for other models of machines as well. It's a great present for yourself, and you'll find it gives you an extended surface that's nice and smooth so things don't fall over the edge. It's especially great for machine quilting, for decorative stitching projects like this, and for machine applique. I love mine. So I'm going to just do one row so that you get the idea of what this is all about. I invite you to try to do different stitches and try them with different widths of double needles, and let me know how you make out. I think it'll open up a whole new world in lieu of learning how to free motion quilt or using rulers or that kind of thing. This is a wonderful and fun alternative. And the fact that Bernina has the technology to realize what you're using tool-wise, meaning needles and feet and so forth, it makes having fun a breeze because the thinking has been done for you. And I like that. So what do you think? Be sure to put some comments in the comments section, like it, share our YouTube videos with others, and subscribe to our channel because we're always coming up with fun things here at Ladyfingers to share with you. So I'm almost done with this pass. Make sure your machine is clean and oiled before you start any project. Anytime you're doing any machine quilting, I've noticed particularly with fusible fleece, it's a little bit, it throws a little bit more dust off into your sewing area because now you have two needles making a mess, right? So it's nothing wrong with the thread. It's nothing wrong with the with any of your equipment. It's just that your double needle means double trouble, double dirty. So you might want to, pay attention to that too. So here we're going around one more round. I don't really need this quite yet. I might not need it at all. But sometimes the pattern will end and you want it to come back and finish its little curlicue. So I keep this nearby just in case I need it to catch part of the pattern. Did you ever think you could do stitches that are this wide? A decorative stitch, not free motion. I think it's awesome, and I really love that this machine can do it. And there's files of these. It's not just this one file full. There's like, I don't know, 4 or 5 files filled with large stitches. And maybe we'll get to be able to show you a little bit of this. Maybe not. So this will keep going off into my whoopee. And I don't think so. No, it's not going to come back that far. Okay, so we're just going to stop. I can just go ahead and cut my thread. pull it out, and I'll just trim this off because I don't really need it anymore for that area. And then I will be ready to go on to the next row, and I'll just continue to do consecutive rows until my my placemat is finished. So you can see it looks pretty cool in the back, doesn't it? Okay. So I hope that you learned something. Next time I'll show you how to do a beautiful bias binding to finish off our placemats. So thanks for watching and have an absolutely wonderful day.
Good.